Hi, it's Sally. Welcome back. So last week we talked about how you're standing at the center of different timelines and how your thoughts are constantly programming which one you step into. So today we're going a bit deeper because there's two main timelines that most of us are choosing between every single day. The negative timeline, where you stay stuck in the conditioning, the survival patterns. The version of you that's just trying to get by. Then you've got the growth timeline, where your true self starts to emerge. So let's talk about what these actually look like and how to recognize which one you've been living in. Okay, so the negative timeline, it's not about being a bad person. It's not about failing or doing something wrong. It's a timeline where you're living from a conditioning instead of truth. Here's what the negative timeline looks like. You wake up and immediately you check your phone. You see what everyone else is doing, and then you start your day in response, reacting to emails, messages, and other people's energy. So you're not really setting the tone. The world is setting it for you. Those same thoughts loop in your mind, like, I'm not good enough, it's too hard, people like me don't do that, or I start when I'm ready. And those thoughts, they're not yours. They're conditioning from parents, society, old trauma, and survival patterns that you picked up years ago. But your subconscious has been accepting them as truth for so long that they just feel like facts now. So you have ideas, dreams, and things you just want to create or say, but you don't act on them. And it's not because you can't, but it's because the conditioning part of you, it just learned to stay, small. So in your mind, that kept you safe, it kept you accepted, and it kept you from being judged or rejected. So you stay in that job that drains you or the relationship that just doesn't serve you anymore. The version of yourself which feels manageable. Now, you're waiting permission to start, or permission to change, or permission to be different. You're just waiting to feel ready or waiting for the right time, or waiting for someone to tell you that it's okay. But that permission never really comes because that negative timeline, it just doesn't want you to leave. So this is what living from conditioning actually looks like. And most people spend their entire lives on this timeline without even realizing they're choosing it. Okay. So the growth timeline. This is where your true self starts to emerge, where you're living from truth instead of conditioning. Now, this is what it looks like, okay? You're creating instead of reacting. You wake up, and before you do anything else, you set an intention. And you choose how you want to show up today. You're not perfect, but you're conscious, you're aware, and you're making choices instead of just running on autopilot. When that voice says, I'm not good enough, you just pause for a minute and ask yourself, is that true? Or is that conditioning? You're not buying every thought that comes through your mind anymore. You're discerning what's mine and what's programming. And then slowly you start feeding your subconscious different thoughts, thoughts that align with who you actually are underneath all of that conditioning. So you don't wait to feel ready anymore. You don't wait for permission. You take one small step and then another and another. Now, this isn't because you're forcing yourself, but it's because your true self is finally getting space to move. She's been waiting for this. Now you start saying no to things that don't serve you, even when people don't understand, and you start saying yes to things that feel aligned, even if it's scary. You stop all the performing and you stop people pleasing. And you stop, shrinking yourself just to fit in spaces which were never really meant for you anyway. And then here's what happens. Your life does start to shift. But not overnight, but consistently it does. Different opportunities start to show up, different people and different possibilities. Because you're stepping into a different timeline. And that timeline has different outcomes. So here's the key difference between these two timelines, okay? The negative timeline is you living from fear and condition. It's that protective shell that you built to survive or to be accepted and stay safe. It worked. So it's got you this far. But it's not meant to be your forever after. Now, the growth timeline, that's you living from truth and trust. So it's your true self finally getting permission to emerge, to be seen, and to take up some space. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you've always been underneath the layers. And you know what? Here's the thing, you don't just choose once. You choose every single day. You choose every moment, every thought, and every action. Now, sometimes you're going to step into that negative timeline. We all do. We're not perfect, that's being human. But the thing is, when you catch yourself there, then you can choose differently, one thought at a time, one small action at a time. And that is the practice. So I can tell you that when I realized that I was living from the negative timeline, I thought I was doing everything right. I was working hard. I was busy all the time and I was ticking all the boxes. But you know what? I still felt stuck, like I was going through the motions, but not actually living. I'd wake up every morning with this low level anxiety. I felt like I should be doing more. I should be further along, and I'm just falling behind. Now that really scared me, being left behind. And I spent my days just reacting and responding to everyone else's needs, trying to keep up and trying to prove that I was enough. Now I thought that was just life, at that point. That's what being grown up means. But then eventually I started to pay attention to my thoughts. And I realized that almost every thought I was thinking was quite negative. Like I'm behind and I'm not doing enough. Everyone else has just figured it out, and I'm failing. Now, these thoughts were just running on a loop. And I'd been living with them for so long that I didn't even question them anymore. And that's when it hit me. I thought I'm living on this negative timeline. Gosh. So I wasn't creating my life, I was surviving it. I was running on conditioning, fear, and old patterns, that weren't even mine. So right there and then I made a decision and I thought I'm gonna start choosing my growth line. I'm gonna use my own mind. But not perfectly, don't get me wrong, and not all at once either, but consciously, you know. And I started small, and I mean really small. So instead of checking my phone first thing in the morning, then I just sit in my bed for 5 minutes and I just close my eyes and breathe. And instead of thinking I should be further along, I'd stop and I'd think, I'm exactly where I need to be. And I had to trust that, you know. Instead of waiting to feel ready, I just take one small action towards something that, really mattered to me. And really slowly, things did start to shift. So then I started to notice when I was in condition mode versus truth mode. And that was really cool. That really did start to stand out. And then I started to make different choices, saying no to things that drained me and saying yes to things that felt aligned, even when they were scary. So I started to trust myself more, trusting that my true self just knew the way, even when my conditioned mind was just freaking out. And then my life did start to change, not dramatically, but deeply. And now look, I'm building this community. I'm making music, which I'm really having fun with. I'm creating content that really does matter to me. And it's not because I've figured it all out, but just because I'm choosing my growth timeline, one small choice at a time, living in the moment. And I'm still choosing it every day, sometimes multiple times a day, because the negative timeline is still there. It still calls me back sometimes. But now I can recognize it and I can choose differently. So here's what I would invite you to do this week. Am I reacting or creating? Do I wake up in response mode or do I set my own tone? Am I running on autopilot? So are the same conditioned thoughts playing on repeat? Am I playing small to stay safe? And what am I doing? Am I waiting for permission or the right time? Am I living from fear or truth? Are my choices coming from conditioning or from my true self? So just write down your answers. Don't judge yourself. Don't judge them. Just notice, because this is what awareness is, and awareness is definitely the first step. Now, for the next 7 days, make one small choice on your growth timeline. It doesn't have to be big, it just has to be intentional. Maybe it's setting an intention before you check your phone or questioning one conditioned thought. It could be taking one small action that you've been avoiding or saying no to something that doesn't serve you. And maybe saying yes to something that scares you, yeah? Just one choice, one day at a time. And then just watch what happens when you consistently choose the growth timeline, even in the smallest of ways. Your subconscious will start to believe it eventually, and your actions will start to align. Your life will start to shift, and it feel good. Now, throughout the week, when you catch yourself in a negative timeline thinking, because you probably will, just don't beat yourself up because that's the worst thing you could do. Just notice it and ask yourself, what would my growth time version of me think or do right now? And then choose that. Even if it feels uncomfortable, even if it's just 1 degree different, over time, those small choices, they become your new normal and your growth timeline becomes your default. Now, as always, if you're serious about this transformation work, and you want to go deeper, then I am building a community where we do this work together, with real conversations and real growth. Now, the link's in the description below. I would love for you to join me. It'd be great. And next Monday, we're going to be talking about planting seeds in your timeline. So that's going to be interesting. So see you then.